Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, we're covering X-Men Fantastic Four #1. Now, this is not the Versus series, right? The X-Men Fantastic Four Versus comic was a 4-part comic from back in 1987. This is different. Doesn't really seem like a Versus comic so much as not even really a team up, just kind of two teams who were there. Now, it could lead into a Versus event, right? But I think it's one of those instances where Marvel's kind of looking back to older stories, seeing their popularity, and kind of bringing them back, which is really what's been happening with C.B. Cebulski as editor-in-chief, right? It's really turned into one of these things where Marvel's kind of looking at like all the types of stories that found them success in the past, and then just like, let's just kind of like try to recreate those or modify those, whatever the case is, and bring them into the modern era, which is a smart move. It kind of makes sense, right? But with Franklin Richards and with this story, it can go one of two ways, right? It could be really, really good, or it could be terrible, right? It really kind of depends. But it's Chip Zdarsky who's writing it, so I've got full faith. The funny thing about this, and this is really where all this kind of picks up, is essentially you've got like Kitty Pryde, right? Now, for those of you guys who are following what's going on in Dawn of X, Kitty Pryde is currently the Red Queen, basically a pirate, and she looks amazing as a pirate, right? Like with the whole like bandana and like the coat and all that kind of stuff. The issue with this is she's basically been summoned to Krakoa, right? Now, remember, Kitty Pryde, for whatever reason, is not able to access the Krakoan gates, right? She cannot pass through the gates the way that mutants normally do. So essentially, she kind of has to take the long way around. But the idea behind this is that she's been summoned by Charles Xavier and Magneto. And the reason why is because they're finally getting to the point where they're trying to call in Franklin Richards. Now, there's a couple reasons for why this is being done, right? Like the surface explanation offered by Charles Xavier is, well, he's one of us and he belongs among his own brethren. The reality of this is it's a power play. That's really all it is, right? It's a power move by Charles Xavier and Magneto. Not so far into say like, we have control, we can do what we want, but in the sense that, as all of you guys know, Franklin Richards is a heavy hitter. The power he will possess when he becomes an adult, and this was covered both in Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four and Mark Waid's A History of the Marvel Universe, the time will come, because Franklin Richards in the role he plays, the time will come that when the universe dies, Franklin Richards and Galactus will merge into a singular being and then be born into the next universe in whatever form they take. But he's a universal reality warper. And even during Hickman's Fantastic Four run, while it was the younger power of Franklin merged with the older power of himself, he still had enough power to basically resurrect Galactus from the dead. Now, even then, even if you look outside of that scenario, you're talking about Heroes Reborn, where basically all the different heroes jumped into Onslaught during the Onslaught saga, basically everybody but the X-Men and Spider-Man, and they were all kind of resurrected by Franklin Richards in a pocket universe he created that he literally carried with him as a blue ball, right? Like, he's resurrected Galactus before during the Abraxas saga. The guy's insanely powerful, and for the X-Men to have somebody of that power on their side is a huge trump card. And if Franklin Richards can't really be indoctrinated so much as come to understand his role among the mutant population, then more likely than not, he'll side with the mutants in whatever various threats that they're facing, and basically nobody will be able to stop them. If you have a guy who can alter reality on a universal scale, who the hell's gonna get in your way? So like, that's the whole nature of the power that Franklin possesses. And so it's interesting because the way that Xavier's been depicted to us over the course of Dawn of X is that he's kind of nefarious. And a lot of that's because of what's been done by Maura McTaggart. She was the one who really kind of led him down this path, right? But nonetheless, the reason why Kitty Pryde's being called here is because of the role that Kitty Pryde played in the early days of Franklin Richards, right? And the reason for that is because I believe at the time Franklin was part of Power Pack, but this took place during the original X-Men versus Fantastic Four story. And the way this played out was that Kitty Pryde was in the process of essentially losing her ability to become physical, right? Like, she had kind of gone intangible and she was kind of stuck that way, right? The idea was that she was kind of fading away more or less. And initially I think it was Magneto, who was leading the X-Men at the time, had approached Reed Richards, in an attempt to basically try to find a way to cure this because of some device that Reed Richards had, but not knowing what the effect was going to be, Reed said no. And so a kind of skirmish broke out. Ultimately, the X-Men went to Dr. Doom in Latveria, and then of course Reed Richards kind of changed his mind and then went to Latveria and then basically helped him out and the day was saved. But during that point in time, Kitty Pryde formed a kind of friendship with Franklin, right? Because in a lot of ways, they were both young, they were both unsure of their powers, they were both unsure of the role that they were supposed to play. It was this notion of they were kind of new to the world and they didn't really know what their place was going to be in the world. And so they kind of found common ground and camaraderie over that, which is a pretty cool concept really for Zdarsky and all of them to bring back. And so ultimately Kitty Pryde says yes. She ends up siding with it and saying, okay, we'll do what we can. Now, the rest of the X-Men are going to show up, but the idea is to send Kitty Pryde ahead so she can kind of chip away at Franklin Richards as best she can, so that when the X-Men show up and they ask the question, hoping things go peacefully, the Fantastic Four and the X-Men say, Franklin, who do you want to go with? That Franklin will choose the X-Men, right? Like, hopefully, Kitty Pryde can kind of bridge that or extend that olive branch and bring him men. Now, of course, she does get a little bit of teasing, from Wolverine, when she goes out and Wolverine's like, so you're really going to do it, huh? And she's like, yeah. He's like, well, good luck. Because he's basically a young kid full of hormones. Who the hell knows what's going to happen with him? And that's really what it is, right? That's really what's going on with Franklin at the moment, is stories that took place in Marvel Comics prior to this, when it came to Franklin Richards, kind of gave us this sort of absolute construct for his character, right? Insofar as he was so young, he didn't really question his parents, right? He didn't really question whether or not what Reed was doing was the right thing to do. Franklin always kind of had this absolute belief of, I'm not going to question my parents, right? They've always done right by me at this point. There's no reason for me to question that. But as we know, when you reach your teenage years, right? 13, 14, 15 years old, the role that you play in this life is you look to your parents to kind of give you a guiding framework, right? To give you a kind of framework by which you go out into the world, right? These are the very fundamental rules that our parents teach us in order to understand the idea that when authority figures tell you to do something, you do it, different things like that, don't hurt people, so on and so forth. From there, we graduate out into the greater tribe, and we try to seek the approval of our peers. And that's when we take all the lessons our parents have taught us and we combine them with all the things that our peers are telling us, and then we kind of come to this sort of conclusion on what our new moral compass is going to be. The confusion comes into play when it's like, well, my friends are trying to get me to do things that I don't know if I should do because my parents told me I shouldn't do it, but are my parents saying that because they're old hat? Like, that's where all that kind of confusion and being young comes into play. And so the bumping of heads and the pushing of barriers, that's where Franklin Richards is right now. And so the thing that really complicates this is that his powers are basically beginning to sort of drain. That Franklin Richards was always kind of viewed as this guy who basically fed off the universe, right? He and the universe were almost kind of part and parcel. As long as the universe existed, Franklin Richards could do his thing. But the idea behind this is and really what's kind of being established here with regards to Franklin's abilities is that there's a kind of theory out there about something called the God power, that every single being out there, right? This all comes from a woman by the name of Rashna Koul. I don't know how you pronounce that. It's Koul. But she had really kind of theorized and hypothesized this idea that the God power was kind of this source of power that exists out there that different people with extreme levels of power could tap into, right? So somebody like Franklin Richards tapped into something like the God power, right? And so what this did is it kind of introduced the idea that Franklin is tapping into an external power source. We just don't know what that is. And where it was believed that external power source was essentially limitless, now it seems like it's limited. It's basically running out and it's running short. And this is when things really get interesting, because Franklin basically takes off with Ben Grimm and starts talking to him, really kind of starts speaking his mind and basically saying, when it comes to my dad, I look at the kind of things he's done, the kind of things he said, the mental blocks that he put in place so I wouldn't really be able to experience the full totality of my power when I was a little kid. Of course, those of you guys know I'm referencing the Avatar story where Franklin Richards had basically been playing with a Rubik's Cube and he got frustrated with it. And so he used his powers and solved it, not realizing what he was doing. And at that same time, there was a TV commercial that came on that said, when are you going to grow up? And so subconsciously, he aged himself into an adult with a child's mind, didn't really understand what was going on, right? So it's little things like that. Franklin in his early days demonstrated these kind of extreme abilities, but didn't really know how to control them. So in order to kind of keep himself, the world, and even the universe safe, Reed Richards put these mental blocks in his mind so his powers wouldn't run awry. And then everybody wakes up one morning and every single human being on the face of the planet has been turned into like Gumby. That's kind of the thing that Reed was afraid of. And so Franklin kind of looks at that and says, given the history of my powers and given the fact that my dad's always really kind of been unsure of me using my abilities, even once we recreated the multiverse and we created, whole universes and when my powers were full on my own and I was in total control of them, he always displayed a kind of unease. And they've always sort of needed your strength. So like, what if Reed is kind of, even if he's not really intending to, basically shortchanging us, right? Like, what if he's blackballing us? And that's the irony of it all, because he did that to Ben Grimm during that exact same story when Franklin aged himself up, right? That old Fantastic Four story. Franklin asked Reed, should I give Ben Grimm what he wants and let him go back to being human? And Reed said no. It's one of these things where Reed almost kind of appears, at least the way this picture's being painted, is almost kind of being shown in a way where he's kind of a dick, right? Like doing things for his own ends. We know that's not necessarily true, but that's kind of how it looks, right? And it's not a matter of what you know, it's a matter of how things look. As a result of that, with Kitty Pryde basically showing up alongside the rest of the X-Men, of course, it really kind of brings things a little bit into a panic, right? Because the first question the Fantastic Four have is, why are you here? And Kitty Pryde being there as well, then it's like, okay, something's kind of going on. And that's when Xavier and everybody kind of spills the beans. Your son's a mutant and he belongs among his own mutant people. Now, here's the important thing to understand. Susan Storm flips, right? She loses her mind because here comes Xavier and Magneto, right? And they tell Mama Bear, we're going to take your baby away. And she's none too happy about that, right? Like, what mom would be okay with a couple of people showing up on her doorstep saying like, we're gonna take your child? That's kind of crazy. Yeah, no mom would tolerate that. And so she immediately lets loose and is just kind of like, stay away from my son. Following that, Xavier steps in and says, we can just take him, right? Like we can just take your son. That'll just be the way it is. Release Magneto or I'll make you do that. And so while this whole scenario, this whole kind of skirmish is popping off, Kitty Pryde grabs Franklin and they just sort of abscond together, right? They just kind of go out there and they just sort of start talking. And this is really one of the reasons why Kitty Pryde was brought along, if I'm being honest with you guys. It really was kind of feeding on the history between herself and Franklin, but it was really kind of Xavier sort of looking at this and saying, this is most likely what's going to happen, right? Like we're showing up on the doorstep of the Fantastic Four and telling them your universally powerful son is a mutant, therefore you should let him go and he should come live with us. Of course you're not going to let him go, not only because he's their son, but because of the power he possesses and how everybody really is kind of afraid of what the X-Men are doing. And so realizing that was most likely what was going to happen, Kitty Pryde was brought along because this is exactly what would have happened. The Kitty Pryde and really leveler heads would have prevailed, and Kitty Pryde would have said, okay, so like let the saner heads prevail, let's just go and talk and let's do our thing. And that's exactly what happens, right? Now this is really familiar to the conversation between Spider-Man and Franklin after the death of Johnny Storm during Hickman's run. But again, it's kind of like, let's just go talk, and let's just go kind of have this conversation. She takes him to one of the Krakoan gates and kind of says, hey, here's what it looks like and that kind of a thing. And Franklin's sort of interested in it. It really seems that his interest is really more insofar as, let's go check out Krakoa and see what it looks like, and then I'll decide for myself. But that's one of the things that I hope you guys are noticing here is nobody's really asking Franklin what it is that he wants, right? People are just assuming they know what's best for him. And the reality is, one, his parents naturally do that. Parents naturally kind of come in and say, I know what's best for you because you're my child and I've been where you are and that kind of a thing. It's one of the disconnects that kind of gets created between parents and children. And then it's the really Xavier and Magneto being full of hubris. Well, he's a mutant, he belongs with mutants. Pretty much every mutant on Earth is at Krakoa. He needs to be there. We know best, right? Because we're saving the mutant population. But nobody's really asking him. And he's old enough to where he can be asked that question and be able to make an intelligent choice. And so in the midst of all this, suddenly Johnny Storm pops up, right? And Johnny Storm's like, where the heck have you been? Everybody's been looking for you. And a fight kind of breaks out between the two groups. And that's the crazy thing about this is, in reality, if I'm being honest with you guys, people are sleeping on Susan Storm. People don't really understand how powerful she is, right? Like if it comes down to it, Susan Storm could kill every single mutant here. Like literally create a force field that just doesn't have any oxygen inside. They'll breathe up all the oxygen there and they'll suffocate, right? Or maybe she'll create a force field inside their head and expand it so their head explodes, right? There's an unlimited number of ways that she can kill everyone here. And so really like the X-Men are kind of picking a fight with a pretty dangerous group here, right? And so, as a result of all that, it's one of these things where Franklin's kind of like, I'm tired of all this. I'm going to make that choice myself. I'm going to go into the Krakoan gate. And when he passes through, nothing happens. He basically runs through one side and out the other. And that's basically it. And the reason for this is really explained when everybody's kind of like, what in the world is like, he should have been able to pass through. When Reed Richards basically chimes in and essentially says, I modified your body's structure more or less so that Krakoa will not see you as a mutant. So if you decide you want to pass through one of these gates, it won't work, right? Like I've made your choice for you. And this is a huge offense to Franklin because what it shows is that Reed doesn't believe his son will make the right choice, or Reed does not believe his son will make the right choice based on what Reed wants him to do. And that's one of the difficult things. One of the most difficult things for a parent to do is to let their kid go, right? To let their kid go out into the world, make mistakes and do things, make their own decisions and become their own person. It's very difficult for a parent to do, but it's one of these things where it has to be done. And that's really what Reed is sort of facing with right now, right? Like letting his son go out there and do his thing. And so with this kind of offense having basically gone down, suddenly Franklin's met with the arrival of Valeria. And Valeria makes the right move, right? She basically says, hey, look, I can help you do this, right? If this is what you really want to do, then I can help you get past all this, right? I'm as smart as my dad was. I can undo pretty much everything he did. It's one of these funny things where parents kind of tend to forget that sort of stuff. But what ends up happening is we basically end up picking up with Kitty Pryde and company while they're out there, on the high seas doing their thing, traveling wherever it is they're going, only for them to realize that Franklin and Valeria have basically stowed away. Not only that, the group's met by the arrival of Dr. Doom. So now what you have is Franklin Richards, whose powers are draining with the Marauders, and then Dr. Doom showing up on the scene. It's anybody's guess what's going to happen now, right? Like it's pretty awesome and it's pretty legit, and it's definitely one of these really cool stories that I want to keep reading and definitely keep covering. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comments Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace. Okay, I want to give a shout out to Kyle B, David Joseph, Ben, John H, AJ, Matt N, Jeff R, John H, Lean and Mean, which is an awesome name, Jason C, Austin S, Austin H, Joey M, Steven Z, Austin B, Adam K, and Genosis 916. Remember guys, you can send me messages and I'll run off whatever your message is at the end of the video, so long as there's nothing crazy. But if you want to put a message in there, send me an email, rob@robertjefferson.com, and if you are one of these people who gets shout outs, then I will tack it in there. And yeah, thanks for watching guys.